The might of the final order will soon be ready. It will be yours if you do as I ask. Kill the girl. End the Jedi. And become what your grandfather Vader could not.
It's the Popcorn Digest with Gareth and Andy. It's the Popcorn Digest.
Hello and welcome to Popcorn Digest, the podcast about the films you love and some you don't. I'm your host Gareth Green, and joining me as always is my full-time co-host and part-time George Lucas groupie, Andrew Raphael.
I have A camera and B camera, and I just sit on my ass, drinking coffee, and wait for something to happen.
And slowly growing his magnificent chin/neck.
Yeah, as a divider.
And today we're venturing to a galaxy far, far away as we turn our iron cannons on Star Wars Episode 9, Electric Boogaloo. But is this sequel a star too far for a dying franchise, or have we unfairly treated this movie like fresh bantha poodoo? Find out after the trailer.
It's an instinct. A feeling. The Force brought us together. We're not alone. Good people will fight if we lead them.
People keep telling me they know me. No one does.
But I do.
Long have I waited. And now, you're coming together. Is your undoing.
From acclaimed director J.J. Abrams and a social media website Reddit comes a checklist of fan demands to be met or we'll shoot your dog. If your favourite The Beatles album is the best of the Beatles, then you're going to love Rise of Skywalker. Everyone's favourite villain, Sheev Palpatine, yes, that's his real name, is back from the dead, somehow, and ready to wreak havoc upon the universe. But this time he's joined by a sinister force known as Darth Disney. Will our heroes Rey, Finn and Poe manage to overcome this senile 90-year-old pensioner who requires an apparatus to move? The stakes have never been higher! And just to make you aware, folks, as well, this will be the first of a double bill Star Wars special, as unlike J.J. Abrams and Disney, we felt it best not to edit these two episodes down into one single incomprehensible mess. So, Andy, Star Wars Episode 9, it's just Rise of Skywalker, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yes, Rise of Skywalker. What did you think of Rise of Skywalker? Is this your first time watching the film?
No.
Yes, we went together to the cinema. I don't know why I asked.
Oh, that's my answers to both questions. No.
Oh, right. No.
Yeah.
And thank you for listening to Popcorn Digest. So, Andy, tell us a little bit about the history of you and Star Wars. Where did this relationship begin? I mean, I know that many of our listeners, our long-time listeners, will know that we've covered Star Wars on this podcast before. We did both the Ewok movies accidentally.
Yeah.
In a previous Christmas episode.
Yeah.
We did mention in there that we both do have very fond memories of the original trilogy, but I think it's best to summarize as well and say what our relationship is with this behemoth of a franchise.
So this section of the podcast will form the first part of this 10-part series on Rise of Skywalker.
Oh dear God.
But I was thinking about this the other day. I genuinely can't remember seeing Star Wars for the first time because from my point of view, it's just always been there. I genuinely can't remember the first time I saw New Hope or any of the original trilogy. It's probably beyond my actual memory. I must have seen them from very, very small, probably from like the ages of 2 or 3, because my parents had them on video. I think we had an original VHS of A New Hope, like the very first issue of it on VHS, and then we had some remastered, pre-special edition remastered versions of Jedi and Empire I don't know why I'm saying them in the wrong order, but never mind. Like, I can see Star Wars fans going, blasphemy! But yeah, they've always been there. Even that Ewoks film, the second one that we reviewed, I had that on video from a very early age, so I knew those films inside and out.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was really into it to the point where my parents, for quite a long time, and this was before the special edition came out and any mention of the prequels being made, back in the early 90s, Star Wars toys, the original Star Wars toys, they went for very, very cheap. You could, you could buy action figures for a penny. Mm-hmm. You know, I love Star Wars already at that point. My parents bought me a lot of early Star Wars toys, so I have quite a lot of Star Wars.
Is that your pension?
It's my pension scheme. Well, until all these other films came and fucked it up. But yeah, it was my pension scheme. They're probably all worthless now. But yeah, I've got a lot of books and vehicles, action figures, you know, the lot. And yeah, I just always watched them. I got the special editions on video, watched quite a few of those at the cinema when they had the re-release.
I mean, do you remember as well, like the fanfare surrounding the re-release of the special editions?
Yeah.
Because I was trying to remember earlier today, did they release them over the same summer in a sporadic pattern?
Yeah, they did like a staggered release, but they were all released in the cinemas.
That's how I remembered it being released, was like over the one big summer period.
Yeah.
And I remember going to the cinema to go see Jedi, and the queue was round the corner of my local cinema. And that was in the 90s. So even then, the appetite for more Star Wars was just incredible.
And yeah, I was just really into Star Wars, and not even the release and aftermath of Episode 1, The Phantom Menace, not even that could curtail my enthusiasm for Star Wars. I mean, I've said this many times on the podcast before. I think I went to see that film about 9 times at the cinema.
Yeah.
Even then, I mean, I knew it wasn't as good as the original trilogy, but even so, I still had a certain degree of enjoyment for it. It wasn't until Attack of the Clones came out that my fervent love of Star Wars started to wane somewhat.
Yeah.
I mean, in between those two as well, I went to a Star Wars convention.
Oh, really?
A local Star Wars convention in Devon.
As C-3PO.
No, it was a pretty good time because the guests that they'd managed to assemble, it was definitely not an official one because David Prowse was there.
Right.
But they'd managed to gather quite a few people for this convention. They had David Prowse, they had Kenny Baker, they had Richard LeParmentier, they had Ken Colley, and Michael Sheard as well, who was like master of ceremonies and was a very nice man.
I'm trying to think what the non-copyright infringement name of this festival would have been.
But it was great, and I got my.
Did it have each of these stars advertised by like the other films that they had been in?
No,
like
it was a
Prowse,
proper. I don't understand.
From the safety videos you have seen about crossing the road.
It was just at some leisure centre. Don't know, because I don't know what the status of those kind of things now. I imagine it's got worse, them clamping down on things like that after that time, because I think it was around about 2000 when I went to that convention. But yeah, it was great, and I got my a Star Wars action figure book, the action figure encyclopedia or something like that. And
you lived a wild life in your childhood, my friend.
It has all the different types of action figure that were released up to that time, like both old and new.
Yeah,
and I got it signed by Kenny Baker.
Oh, lovely!
So that's cool.
That is pretty cool. So you have quite a fondness as well for the original trilogy.
But then Attack of the Clones came out, and my love, I wouldn't say it completely died, but it was very much diminished.
Yeah.
I remember watching that film, and afterwards my mum never says this about films, like especially in the cinema when we used to watch films, but she was like, that was a load of shit. Like she said afterwards, like, I just remember watching it and going, why is this so boring? And why does it look like a video game? Because even the first one doesn't look like that.
Yeah, I tried to convince myself that I enjoyed Attack of the Clones, and I think it was like about a month after it came out, and I had seen it for like the 5th time. And the thing that I kept on holding on to, which has become something of a meme on the critic circles in and of itself, was, well, Empire gave it 5 out of 5.
Infamous 5 out of 5.
It must be good. And so for like about a good month after release, I'm talking to my friends. I was like, no, I think we've just got it wrong. I think it's doing something different. And it was like about a month later, I was like, oh my God, I remember going to see it, and like the wool had been pulled from my eyes.
Yeah.
And I could see it then. And that really damaged Star Wars for me. But I would say that up until this point, although we've had, different films come out and TV series and a variety of games and books, and all of this is to like a varying degrees of success. I would still say that my opinion of the original trilogy went largely unchanged until very recently, for reasons that we will get into soon. But like, I have a very similar background when it comes to Star Wars with yourself, is that Star Wars is a film that I think the generation that raised us loved so much that I can't remember a time. I mean, obviously, for me, there was never a time before Star Wars. I was born in '86, but I can't remember the first time I watched it. I do remember seeing it on VHS, but it was in 4:3 pan and scan.
Yeah.
That must have been like the version that I had seen for the first time, was watching it in the 4:3 pan and scan.
Yeah.
And yeah, I was huge on Star Wars growing up. Everybody at our school was. And like I say, I remember the fervor surrounding the release of the special editions as well, and they came at a time as well where CGI was in something of a transitional period. It was new and exciting, and even the worst CGI back then, I was still just happy to see it on screen, whereas now I can really see it for the trash that it is, like how they kind of muddied those films. But I would even think, like, the special editions I would feel fonder about if we just had access to the original versions of the film.
Yeah.
Anyway, yes, they're very similar. I won't go through, like, my relationship with Star Wars in much further detail, just because it's very much similar to your own. And I think that people of our generation will know exactly what we're talking about. Like, people that were raised in, like, born in the late 80s and early 90s that just grew up in a pop culture environment that was just enriched with Star Wars related activity, I guess.
Do you remember those halcyon days when there were only 3 Star Wars movies and only 3 indie movies, only 3 Raiders movies?
Okay, so yes, let's move on to Rise of the Skywalker. So as everybody knows that listens to this podcast, normally before we begin to discuss our opinions on the film that is our topic, we do like to go into the context and the history of the film. Now, this one is weird in that it's both a film that is very recent, but it also has a lot of history to go into it. And I have some points that I want to discuss, and they're mainly going to be surrounding the transition from The Last Jedi into Rise of the Skywalker. But Andy, I just wanted to ask, do you have anything to add before I begin down that road of the Colin Trevorrow saga, we'll call it? Do you have anything to add just in regards to the making of these films?
I think the big thing that I noticed from the off when Disney bought Lucasfilm, even when we were first hearing about it in the news, and I remember talking about it with you at the time, it did send alarm bells ringing that they'd, in one fell swoop, announced that they'd bought Lucasfilm, and they basically had a release date for the first episode done and dusted within the same meeting, and that sent alarm bells ringing because they'd greenlit a film when the ink hadn't even dried on the contract. And I think that's the big issue that all these films, every single one that they've made so far, has suffered from, that they went out of the gate far too quickly with any of these films.
That is where the foundations for destruction were really, like, that's where the seeds of destruction were sown in regards to this series. Because I think as well, like, I will talk positively about the prequels just in this sense, but I do understand that they came to be made because George Lucas essentially needed a hit as well, and he needed something to reinvigorate his kind of financial situation, the divorce, for example. And that was like a motivating factor behind him making the prequels, but it wasn't something that he rushed into. It was still something that he thought about. We see the way that he writes scripts, and it's kind of like he locks himself in a room and then in the last 3 hours he writes a script. But the decision to make those films weren't ones that he just rushed into without any plan of action or plan of idea or anything like that. It was something that he actually came round to over the years. If he really wanted to capitalize on the success of Star Wars, he could have made another 3 films 3 years afterwards, essentially what Disney are going to do now. Instead, he waited until he needed to make the films and until he had an idea of what he wanted to do. I don't like what George Lucas did with those films, but I get that that is the way really that films should be made. With Disney, like, you could see the stark difference in terms of the way in which Star Wars films had been made in the past to how they're made now within a studio system. Straight from the off, the moment that the ink, before it was even dry on the page, they had essentially announced a release date. And that straight from the off tells you that there's something more at play here. And I think the $4 billion price tag that Lucasfilm had was really the motivating factor behind just getting a Star Wars film out there in any way, shape, or form.
Yeah.
But in many ways, I think has actually come as something of a financial hindrance now.
Yeah.
Because they've rushed those films out, because they've pushed them through without really much thought as to what they want to do and what their vision is for this series. I think just that first foundational step, it's really undercut them on a long-term basis.
I think as well, I'm not sure whether George himself, I mean, despite my extreme reservations about the prequels, they did have some purpose. Like, they were created with a purpose in mind.
And a sense of vision.
Yeah, but I'm not quite sure what motivated Lucas to sign over Lucasfilm to Disney in the first place. There was always seemed to be something not quite right about it, even from the start. It seems to have been reported that he feels kind of betrayed by the people that he put in charge, Kathleen Kennedy and obviously Bob Iger and everybody.
Bob Iger actually writes about it quite candidly in his book. And I mean, it's a book I would recommend. I spoke about it on the Twin Peaks episode of the show. But it does get a bit wishy-washy. You do feel like there's only so much he can reveal or wants to reveal as well.
Yeah, it's the lawyer's cut.
Exactly, yeah. But when it comes to the Star Wars element of the book and the selling of Lucasfilm to Disney, you get a sense as well that it was a decision that George Lucas took as an almost, like, he said no so many times to Bob Iger in regards to the sale. And then at the last minute decided, okay, yeah. Like his arm had been twisted into accepting the deal. And I think there was a promise, like an unwritten promise, that George Lucas was still going to have more authority within the studio system.
Yeah.
But as soon as the ink was dry on the page, he found that he had sold away his baby, essentially, and they kind of just left him behind in the dust of the deal to go and enjoy his millions. He essentially had no authority whatsoever over anything that was made within the series. And they tow him out every now and again to be the, like, to have some pictures taken on the red carpet, like, oh, look, we still have him around here, this old geezer. But from every interview that he has, you can tell that his opinion of that deal has soured completely.
It's the old joke of this deal gets worse every time. Pray that I don't alter it any further. Isn't that like a robot chicken one that they made out of that? Yeah, I just think the way that they've made these films, I mean, as much as I don't like the prequels, it goes so much against the whole ethos of Lucasfilm in the first place, like the way that they used to make those, all the Lucasfilm films, we were talking about Willow and the prequels and the special editions and the original Star Wars and everything else in between. They were always created with a purpose and with a purpose of telling a story that needed telling. Whether or not it was good or not, it didn't matter. It still had some sort of value system attached.
Every time we both talk about the prequels, we have to like place it within context.
There's a huge asterisk next to that.
Like reminding the audience that we still do not like these films.
No.
The thing that I will say about them as well is, and again, I'm not a particular fan of this, but I like that something along these lines was attempted. You can tell that he was trying to say something about the world that we lived in at the time, with its whole commentary on the war on terror and that type of thing, and the loss of democracy to dictatorship. And that type of thing within the Senate. You can see that he's retelling a story. We even have characters that are repeating lines that are almost George W. Bush verbatim. So George Lucas, behind that, he has a vision of what he wants to tell. He's kind of playing about with the aesthetics and the dressing of that story to meet some fan demands. Because if you remember as well, people said that The Phantom Menace was too childlike, so he made Attack of the Clones a bit more gritty, apparently. But you can tell that there's a sense of a message behind what he's trying to tell. When I look at this sequel trilogy, I don't know what the message is. I think there is only one film with a message. That is The Last Jedi. And I will say that's the film that works the most for me, but we'll get into that later as well, because I still think it's not without its faults. But by and large, if you take that step back and look at it as a beginning, middle, and end, I don't know what that series is trying to say.
No, it was created without a central purpose. I don't think there really was, because I mean, even when Force Awakens came out and you got the artwork book,
the art of the Force Awakens,
a lot of the concept art, it's almost like a way of of generating ideas
Yeah.
rather than the other way around. It's like the art's dictating the ideas rather than the traditional way around, where you have an idea for a story and then you bring in concept artists later and they sort of make your on-paper ideas, they translate them in a visual sense, whereas this is just a grab bag of, oh, that would be cool.
Yes.
And them trying to scramble some sort of story out of these images. And a lot of the images in the book ended up being reused in later films and predominantly the film that we're going to be talking about.
Yes, and another book was deleted actually before release, and J.W. Rinsler had written an extensive making of The Force Awakens, much in the same way that he had written about the original trilogy. However, when that came to actual publication, Disney decided it was best not to release that book. They found it perhaps was too revealing of the turmoil behind the scenes. Because one thing as well, even in the making of documentary for Rise of Skywalker, J.J. Abrams talks about The Force Awakens as him just getting a Star Wars film out of his system. And when that film was finished, he had the sense that, well, I'm not making another Star Wars film again. That's it now. I can relax. Essentially, he had such a negative experience making that film because he was essentially making it up as they went along, to the point in which I'm sure I remember reading somewhere that they referred to at one point the fact that Harrison Ford broke his leg as a godsend. So it allowed them time to refocus the script. And I get the feeling that that's why that film relies on so many plot points and so much in a way of familiar imagery, that I think that's symptomatic of a film made without an idea of what they want it to be.
I remember as well, before filming even began on Force Awakens, them begging Disney for more time.
Yeah.
Do you remember that, when they're like, we want another 6 months, we want another year, and Disney just kept saying no? Because originally that was going to be released in the May of 2015, and they managed to extend it by another sort of 8 months or something.
And it took Harrison Ford breaking his leg for them to agree to push the film back. And I remembered reading as well that it was all to do with the yearly stockholder meeting. Like, they needed it to be within a certain year, to come down within a certain year in order for it to look good on their books. And if it came out beyond that point, beyond that stock year, the tax year or whatever it is, it looked far worse. It was all about the perception of the company rather than it was about the artistic integrity or anything like that.
And also, it was about the short-term perception of the company as well. I think that's what business seems to yo-yo between short-term and long-term constantly. This just got caught in that short-term vision for the company, which I think was the complete wrong way to look at it.
Yeah.
It's strange. They looked at it as, and they constantly discuss it as being a long-term investment, but they treated it as a short-term thing, which I don't understand.
I know Bob Iger as well, in his book, he does speak about the fact that he places the blame on the place in which Star Wars is at now on himself, because he asked for a lot of Star Wars products very quickly, and he wanted Star Wars everything yesterday. And he said that it led us to a point in which we didn't know where we were going with not just the series, but the franchise as a whole. And I guess this is where this break has come from. It's like it's out of necessity to really put the brakes on. I know we've still got The Mandalorian going on TV, and that does feel like it's a show with some sort of artistic vision behind it as well. And that seems to be given a lot more space, a lot more breathing space to allow directors and writers to come in and make something a little bit more interesting within that brand. But as for the films, they've really put the brakes on what they make. And I don't think it's been decided what's really going to happen next. I know Taika Waititi is supposed to be the architect behind whatever incarnation we see next. But I don't know if that's completely set in stone yet.
No, I mean, even something I was reading this morning, even though some of these things have been sort of tentatively announced, nothing is set in stone. It's almost like it seemed to be a little bit of a smokescreen at the moment, because from a lot of things I've been looking at, there seems to be some sort of internal ructions within Lucasfilm itself in terms of who is going to be in control at the end of the day. I'm not sure, how many of the alleged leaks that are coming out at the moment are indeed true, but it doesn't seem like all is well in Lucasfilm at the moment anyway. It does feel like they're just busy scratching their heads, I think.
I think even if you disregard the leaks and are able to read between the lines in terms of the comings and goings of certain directors and writers and the constant mutual creative difference statements that come out from that company, you get the feeling that there is no sense of vision or direction behind what they want to do with this. Or the other option could be that there's just too many people with an opinion on what they want Star Wars to be, and as a result, that's coming up with this kind of soup of a mess of ideas. And I do have some things to say as well, just in regards to that. I think one place that's good to start with the context, the making of the film. I do want to talk about The Last Jedi today as well, because I think The Last Jedi is instrumental. It's a necessity to discuss The Last Jedi when discussing Rise of the Skywalker.
Yeah.
But just to go over the very basics as well about the making of the film, I think we better get into the Colin Trevorrow saga, because talking about directors coming and going, that is a big one for this franchise. Because I remember when we went to see The Last Jedi. Was he fired after The Last Jedi?
Just prior, I think.
But yeah, I remember when we had seen one of the films, probably The Force Awakens, and we were talking about we couldn't wait to see Rian Johnson's sequel. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, we could probably do without Colin Trevorrow's trilogy capper.
Yeah.
So even then, there was some trepidation towards that particular film in the series. So Colin Trevorrow was hired to direct Star Wars Episode 9 in 2015, and that was following the success of Jurassic World, which, despite the fact that I think it is a rather terrible film, it made a lot of money. And it was made with Steven Spielberg's blessing as well. He does have an executive producer credit, and as such, I think that meant that he had an in when it came to the Star Wars franchise. He pitched them his idea for what the third film should be, and apparently Kathleen Kennedy and Bob Iger really responded to what that idea of the film was going to be. However, after being hired to direct and write this film with his writing partner Derek Connolly, we do have the bomb that came out, that is the Book of Henry. I haven't seen the Book of Henry, but I did read the script, and the script is amazingly bad. I had a lot of fun reading that script. And also, in the years since, Jurassic World, although it was a financial success, and the sequel was a financial success as well, it had gained this critical backlash towards the actual quality of the films. Because I think the reason that the Jurassic World films are a success is because there are no other dinosaur movies out there, and kids love dinosaurs. To be honest, I want to watch dinosaur movies as well. I really do think that the perception of those films, because they are not good, I think that's come round in a big way when it comes to Colin Trevorrow now. Even though he can make money, and he's proved that he can make money within these franchises, he's not proved himself to be like an artistic talent, which is what the series needs, someone with some artistic flourish.
Yeah. I don't think he has a particularly great instinct for cinema. I mean, he doesn't have a good eye. I mean, if you look at the shot compositions in Jurassic World, they're pretty pedestrian. Mm-hmm. And, I mean, I'm sure there's something wrong with him.
There's a Book of Henryness about him.
He has some very odd ideas. I mean, he is probably a little bit George Lucas-like in that respect. But with the Book of Henry, it's like, I have to question the sanity of everyone involved in that film, because why did no one go, excuse me, this is absolute bullshit and doesn't make any fucking sense and is quite wrong, like morally at the same time?
I read the same scripts. I read it before the film came out, and I read that script, and I couldn't believe that somebody had read that script and thought it was a good idea to make that movie.
Yeah.
To be honest, if there's any people out there that are listening that are taking any screenwriting courses or just basic writing courses as well, and you want to know an idea of what not to do in terms of the structure of your scripts and the story and how it unfolds in the exposition, I would say, particularly when it comes to tone, considering that some of the twists in that film, to pay attention to the tone of the piece as well, considering the magnitude of what's actually happening.
Yeah.
That's the script to read, really.
Yeah.
I will say, though, that isn't a Colin Trevorrow script. I know that he apparently rewrote it, but the version that I read was not a Colin Trevorrow script, but he read that script and thought, I need to make that movie.
It's the fact that he thought that would make a good idea for a film. You know, a good script to make a film off. I mean, I think the thing with Colin Trevorrow that it's proven, people constantly harp on about safety not guaranteed, but the thing is, safety not guaranteed is an okay film.
I enjoyed it, yeah.
But it's fine in its very unambitious terms, and its little sort of thing that it's carved out for itself.
Yeah, so it's like a lovely little indie movie. It's not like it's the most ambitious film when it comes to the way in which the story is told or anything like that. It's just a nice little character piece.
Yeah, which wasn't written by him.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
Yeah, and I think just every other film that he's like made or been involved in is just dog shit, really. Like, he's not made anything redeemable. I mean, even like Jurassic World Fallen Kingdom, J.A. Bayona directed the shit out of that film, but it's based on an absolute dog shit screenplay.
Yeah.
It's like shit on my shoes screenplay.
Like, it is night and day when you compare it to Jurassic World in terms of like the shot composition, the pacing of it, the way in which he constructs his set pieces as well, and the reveals within. Fallen Kingdom is so much a step above, but it becomes so much more apparent how bad the script is.
Yeah.
Because it works in one sense but doesn't whatsoever in the other. It's still just rotten to its core.
Yeah. But anyway, Duel of the Fates.
Yes, I was just about to say, we should say that the script that he actually wrote with Derek Connolly is Duel of the Fates, which is an obvious reference to episode 1. And I will say that as a script, have you read the script Duel of the Fates?
I've read some of it. I watched the breakdown, so I know all the main story beats.
I read it, but I will say that Jenny Nicholson does a fantastic breakdown of the script that, to be honest, you don't really need to read it. It's probably best just to watch that. It is a really great in-depth and rather funny breakdown of the script.
It is.
But from what I could gather, it seemed to try and bridge the gap between the prequels and the sequel trilogy in terms, and even the original trilogy in terms of the places that it's going to, the aesthetics that it seemed to be dealing with as well. Like Coruscant seems to be a huge factor in the story as well. It seems to be essentially the beating heart in terms of the location of the film. It seems to be the beating heart at the center of the proposed film, I should say. And in some ways, I can see how this is a better sequel to The Last Jedi. Not a better sequel. I can see that it is a sequel to The Last Jedi. It is a sequel. It seems to be taking some of the themes and moving on with them. But I also think that it's just as flawed as Rise of Skywalker's script, but in just completely different ways.
Yeah.
In a more Colin Trevorrow, Derek Connolly way.
Just seems to have the strange things going on with the characters. I mean, like, the biggie is the Poe and Rey thing that they try and replicate, the Chris Pratt, Bryce Dallas Howard thing that they seem to just lean back on every now and again.
If they had gone with that, it would have been weird that in each film, Rey would have possibly had a different romantic interest. Because in the first one, it's supposed to be Finn, really. And then in the second one, it's Kylo. And then in the third one, it was going to be Poe.
Yeah. And also, just the narrative doesn't seem to gel together particularly well. Like, you've got that whole thing with Kylo Ren and his sort of half metal face and going to Tor Valum and all that kind of bullshit.
Tor Valum, yeah.
Yeah. And it just seems like lots of mini stories trying to become one flowing narrative, but not really managing it. And then you've got that kind of Harry Potter ending at the end.
Yeah.
With the Rey Solana.
Yeah, I've actually written on my notes that I have a Harry Potter feeling when it comes to Rise of the Skywalker anyway.
Yeah.
And it's not just John Williams. But yes, Duel of the Fates as well. It also has probably the worst line in a Star Wars script ever, which is when one of the characters dies. Hux, in fact, it says something like, Hux is dead. He has lost the Star Wars. And I was like a mix of angry and happy when I read that line.
I want to read the original script that was written in crayon.
No, you just think that's brown crayon. It isn't.
Just dipped in shit.
Yeah, just one poopy finger.
But yeah, that script was going to be rewritten, wasn't it, by Jack Thorne?
Yes. Bob Iger and Kathleen Kennedy didn't like the script or the direction that the film was going into. So they brought on Jack Thorne, who is Star Wars Rising essentially on the back of his work on the Harry Potter stage play. I think that had just been released around that time as well.
Yeah.
We actually know somebody that worked on the original production as well.
Yeah, we do.
You went to university with them.
Yeah.
But yeah, so Jack Thorne was brought on board to do a rewrite, but neither Kennedy nor Trevorrow really liked that particular rewrite, and Trevorrow wanted another go at the script, but Kennedy went nah, and he was essentially let go from the production.
And Book of Henry had crashed and burned by this point as well. So
yeah. So I think the floor had kind of fallen out finally underneath Trevorrow when it comes to his time on Star Wars. He does speak about it fondly. I know that Daisy Ridley, there's that story that she told where Colin Trevorrow came to him and explained what her arc would be for that film, and she started crying in the bar that she was in, and she thought she couldn't wait. And I remember when I was reading the script, I was like, which part is she referring to that made her cry?
Was she crying in a kind of, oh, it's so shit?
Yeah, was it when Hux was killed?
Oh, yeah, he lost the Star Wars.
He lost the Star Wars.
And like maybe she was like, oh, I've lost the romance with Oscar Isaac.
It wasn't very good. And I get completely why it was dropped. I will say as well, I've just got a piece of information that when asked by the website IO9 about why Trevorrow was dropped from the film, Kennedy had this to say. Well, I wouldn't say it didn't work. Colin was at a huge disadvantage not having been part of Force Awakens and in part of those early conversations because we had a general sense of where the story was going. Like any development process, it was only in the development that we're looking at a first draft and realizing that it perhaps was heading into a direction that many of us didn't really feel that it was quite where we wanted it to go. And we were on a schedule that should be like the starting line of the crawl for any Star Wars film that's released.
There's so much wrong with this statement.
Star Wars Episode 9, Rise of the Skywalker. We were on a schedule. So I said, and we were on a schedule, as we often are with these movies, and had to make a tough decision as to whether or not we thought we could get there in time or not. And as I said, Colin was at a disadvantage because he hadn't immersed himself in everything that we all had starting out with Episode 7.
But I'm like, sorry, Kathleen, I'm going to have to stop you there, right? So you had all these meetings and things regarding the general shape of the trilogy. And I'm assuming you're going to have assistants that are either videotaping, recording this, or making notes, doing minutes. Because obviously, with something as big as this, you are going to have, you want to document absolutely everything that you can, and you don't let the director of your third movie see any of this before making the fucking script.
No.
So I'm thinking So I'm thinking all these meetings that you had actually don't fucking exist. Like, they never actually had these conversations in the first place. You're making it up as you're fucking going along, aren't you?
It's a diplomatic answer, that one. It really is.
I mean, I've got a ton of those written down.
It's just like the stock answer, really.
Yeah.
For all that she says about Colin having not been there during the early conversations with J.J. Abrams about making The Force Awakens, it's like, well, neither was Rian Johnson. He still made a film.
Yeah, he only came in sort of towards the back end of, wasn't it? Like,
exactly, yeah. It's just a bullshit answer, really, to say that we realised we had hired the wrong person too late. We had already lost our bottle as to the kind of film that we wanted to make, and we realised that we had no vision.
It's all post Last Jedi reaction conversation, isn't it, as well? Because that's maybe something we need to sort of maybe touch on, as well as the release of Last Jedi.
Well, I was going to say, that does bring us on to really our next point, is because Rian Johnson was actually rumoured to be in line to replace Trevorrow, although Johnson says this was never the case. When the rumours did actually come out and were reported to the press that Rian Johnson was going to be the next big honcho behind the last film, the very next day J.J. Abrams was hired. Which, says everything. And J.J. Abrams brought on the co-writer of Batman vs. Superman, Chris Terrio, to help rewrite the previous drafts. Most of it was thrown out and they started from scratch. They did keep the spy element. Like the beginning of the film, I think, it's not the spy element, not with Hux, but the very beginning, I think, of the film where they meet that little character that gives them some sort of information.
Yeah.
That's from the script. And I think a couple of scenes later, you see that particular character that gives them the information get executed on Coruscant as a rebel. I remember thinking that was a good moment.
Yeah, there's a lightsaber guillotine.
Yeah.
That's the only thing that survived, because obviously that character, even though it's a completely different character, is beheaded.
Yeah.
His head is on the table, and that's pretty much all that survived from Colin Trevorrow's script. There's literally nothing left.
To be honest, I liked that. I did like that part of the script as well, especially the execution in front of the crowd. However, the lightsaber guillotine is like, what? Has it got crystals in it?
Don't ask.
So, yes, but I think as well, that really opens the door into The Last Jedi. So, Andy, It's been a few years now. I remember that we both went to see Last Jedi. We were both quite positive about it at the time, but we've allowed it to sit now. We've had another film be released really in the wake of The Last Jedi, and opinions have changed for a lot of people for that film, both negative to positive and positive to negative. You know, it's one of those films that's been a bit fluid in terms of the reaction. So I want to know, where do you stand with The Last Jedi now?
It's funny because I was going to watch it in the lead up to this, but then I couldn't be asked, to be honest. The aftermath of Rise has kind of made me just not asked about watching any of the sequel trilogy, because
that is a big feeling on my side as well. I'll go into that.
I'm not on the fence, but I'm kind of mixed, and I can kind of see both viewpoints, because whilst I find some of the things that they do in Last Jedi quite interesting, and it's quite surprising and subverting, which I think is good. And I love the idea about Rey coming from nowhere.
It's the best idea the series had.
Bringing back that idea that anyone can have the power of the Force, which seemed to be the thing that people loved about, A New Hope in the first place.
Yeah.
That seems to have been battened down over the years, and it kind of reintroduces that concept. I can understand, even though I find it myself to be quite an interesting path to go down, I can completely understand why people would not like how Rian Johnson handled Luke, because I'm thinking in the shoes of a long-term fan, for example, who's maybe grown up on reading like the books and everything, wanting some sort of further adventures of Luke Skywalker, and then being confronted with this very postmodern take on the character.
Yeah, definitely,
to be completely turned off by it. I think the thing that didn't help the cause, there was some maybe very oddly placed humor in the film, which I maybe think on a second pass you could have lost. I think there was, because people always bring up that stuff, when he's drinking that green milk, for example.
I am a green milk fanboy.
Yeah, but all that little business with the little people that live on the island, which seem to just magically appear, considering you didn't see any of them in the previous film. From a writer's point of view, I like what they did with Luke. I'm not sure it was executed as well as it could have been, but at the same time I have to applaud it for trying something new, because it's the only fucking film that actually tries something new, gets its fingers burnt for it, but it tries.
I came out of The Last Jedi very positively, and I was quite surprised by the negative reaction towards the film. I do get it. I do in some sense. I particularly think now on rewatching it, the whole part of the film that doesn't work for me, and that didn't work for me on my first go through as well, that I was hoping would improve in further rewatches, is the whole Canto Bight sequence. I think it touches upon a good idea buried within the whole section of that film. But I don't think that whole section really works. It feels a bit Harry Potter-ish as well.
Yeah.
The ride on the horse things, I forgot what they're called.
Yeah.
And I also think it does a massive disservice to the character of Finn.
Yeah, I think Rian Johnson really struggled with what to do with Finn, actually.
Yeah, I think that's an issue with the character after Force Awakens.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Because I think, looking at it in retrospect, the character of Finn is botched from the word go, because on paper he should be the most interesting character.
Yeah.
And in my opinion, and I'll go into this later, he should have perhaps been the central element of this series.
Yeah.
Yeah, what I do think worked, sorry, I know my son's kicking off at the moment, he's teething, so this will be one of those episodes where we have a third guest that is a crying baby. I love this version of Luke Skywalker. Like, this is the only logical version of Luke Skywalker as well after The Force Awakens. Like, I absolutely buy into Rian Johnson's idea of why wasn't Luke there when Han died? Why didn't he feel it if he was so in tune with the Force? Unless he had simply cut himself off from the Force completely. And it's like, there's only one logical explanation for that. But I love what Rian Johnson does with it. And I love that it's essentially a redemption arc for him. And I also like the unreliable narratorness about the birth of Kylo Ren, that it's never really truly set in stone what truly transpired and from what viewpoint is the correct one. And I love all that stuff. And I like how challenging it is to accept as well, because I do understand that there is a feeling, and there is an attraction to having the Luke Skywalker character be much like, say, for example, what they did with Indiana Jones in the Young Indiana Jones Chronicles, where, that episode where Harrison Ford comes back as old Indiana Jones for one episode and he's got the fugitive beard and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And it's like, he's just sat in a chair being cool and pure indie. I like that what they did with this was I know it's become a meme as well to say, oh, well, it subverted my expectations. But it's not just that it subverted my expectations, but it's that it replaced it with something that I found both challenging and rewarding. I mean, I guess I haven't given it enough credit, like the people that don't like it, enough credit as well to say, and perhaps I should, to say that because it is a big jump. It is a big leap to take with that character, considering that he is like one of the central elements of our pop culture growing up, like one of the most beloved characters, really. Everybody projected themselves onto Luke Skywalker when watching those movies. And then to find yourself having to project onto this craggly old man that had closed himself off from the world, it became far more challenging to do so and to see his viewpoint. And I like that, but I should give more credit to people that don't, because it is a big leap to take. And if you can take that leap, I think it's a rewarding film. But if you can't take that leap, then that film's going to fall for you.
And I think even if you don't like it, I think it's very, very unfair to place all of that blame on Rian Johnson's, because at the end of the day, he is coming in to write a film that, you know, that's following up someone else's writing, and he was not the person who made the decision to not have Luke in the first film and put him on the island and have him not be involved in any of the events of that first film. And, you know, he had to come up with a reason as to why. J.J. Abrams just thought, oh, we'll make it a treasure hunt for Luke Skywalker. And he appears at the end. I'm done, bye. It's like, and someone else has got to come up and go, fuck, why is he on that island and why didn't he come back?
Well, that's the thing with those two films is particularly, I mean, I like The Force Awakens as well. I like it, but I think it's become less rewarding over time. But I still think it's a viscerally fun film, but I don't feel anything towards it anymore. And what I would say is that the thing is that the issue is with both The Force Awakens and The Last Jedi is that they are two franchise starters that are at war with each other. It should have been one or the other, essentially. And I honestly think that if The Last Jedi had been the beginning of the franchise, like that type of film for the beginning of a new franchise, then perhaps it would have been more successful, but also it would have allowed us to go more places with... Because I think one of the things that you've mentioned to me as well is the lack of interaction between the old players of the series. Like, and I think if we had The Last Jedi as a starting point with the option of bringing Han into it, build towards the point of these characters reuniting would have been far more rewarding as well.
Yeah, I think the thing I picked up on in hindsight now, the kind of stupidity of the producers in how they handled the original cast, because I never understood why they would have left the story focusing on Leia till the end, because even though she is the youngest cast member, in terms of being in shape to be in a film like that, she was the least in shape to be headlining a movie. I kind of felt like they should have done something with her and then leave it be, because she hadn't been in great shape for quite a long time. Whereas, say, someone like Mark Hamill, you know, is fine. I mean, Harrison Ford, you're probably only ever going to get for one film, because he always wanted Han to be killed off anyway, and that's like a sort of a wish list thing, and he was probably only ever going to commit to doing one film. But Mark Hamill, he was probably up for doing the whole bloody thing.
Yeah, I think he was.
So I never really understood why they handled it in that way.
If anything, I think it should have been built up as the Han return being the thing that the series was building up to, rather than him just being in one and done.
Yeah.
This is something I think people have danced around and nobody's really gotten into, but did making these films take years off her life? Because if I recall, I remembered in interviews her saying that she was told that in order to be cast in this film that she had to lose weight and that type of thing. So she was going to the gym and she was jetting across the world as well to market the film. But I think one of the things that nobody really talks about is how probably doing these films were at a detriment to her already fragile health.
Yeah.
I mean, let's face it, she liked to party, but I think actually there was too much demanded from her with these films, just in terms of, I get that having a Leia that approaches something that we remember in terms of how she looks, but you know what? People age, people get old. That's just natural. Why do we have to have these characters go through fitness camp in order to be in these films? Just
yeah.
I feel like something's happened there that nobody really wants to talk about. Maybe it's just the grasp of Disney that nobody really wants to get into that aspect. I feel like there's been a failure there, both on a story level, absolutely, but also in terms of the way in which she's been treated.
Yeah.
It does seem that from obviously the documentaries and the featurettes that she really enjoyed her time making these films. And I love Carrie Fisher. I found her to be an amazing woman. And
Yeah.
I've read a couple of her books as well. And she's not just a fantastic actress, but she's also an incredibly talented writer. And that shows in some of the films that she's worked on as well. And some of the films that she's saved in terms of her script doctoring.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
She has lived an incredibly interesting and amazing life with its incredible highs and amazing lows. It's The Princess Diaries is definitely a book to read.
I was watching When Harry Met Sally the other day as well, and she's great in that as well.
Yeah.
It's really sad as well, like thinking that both... obviously, in When Harry Met Sally, the alternative couple are no longer with us.
Yeah.
Both very much died far too young, especially like
Is it Bruno?
Bruno Kirby.
I was watching him in Donnie Brasco the other day, actually, just a couple of weeks ago. And he's great. I really like him.
Yeah.
I do think as well, like, The Last Jedi feels like a proper sequel to A New Hope in terms of carrying on and re-establishing the message that A New Hope sets. And I think that last shot of The Last Jedi, it could have been the end of the sequel trilogy, really. I kind of wish that was the message that the whole sequel trilogy ended with, was this beginning that anybody could be the Jedi. The Jedi's never dead. The Force is within us all and everybody. It's not about your bloodline, because Rise of the Skywalker brings it straight back to bloodline again. And I think like that positive message of anybody can be the Jedi, anybody can rise up, anybody can be the center of the next revolution is far more rewarding than how it does end. With the, what's your name? Well, I'm Rey Skywalker. It's like, oh, great, another Skywalker.
And I think that's the thing with Last Jedi, is that it was written in isolation by a filmmaker who was making that film. But with something like this, you can't really do that. With the original trilogy, I mean, you only have to read a few chapters of those J.W. Rinsler books to realise that this grand plan that Lucas had is actually a load of bullshit. They were pretty much flying by the seat of their pants with coming up with the major story elements. I mean, the whole idea of Darth Vader being Luke's father was something that was created way after A New Hope and in the development of Empire. And they had no fucking idea what they wanted to do with Jedi. But I think the main difference between that is that you still had George involved in all three. So even though they are making it up as they go along, you've still got a continuity of personalities.
Continuity of vision.
Yeah. And I think that's what this sequel trilogy, I think what they should have done is have a co-writer that went all the way through. And then they could have worked with each one of the directors, but you had a writer that was contracted to be involved in all three films.
Yeah.
Then you would have a clear through line, and also in terms of a sort of a screenwriting voice as well, it would be sort of more consistent in that way.
You know who my favourite George Lucas is? My favourite period of George Lucas history is the George Lucas that hired Irvin Kershner to direct The Empire Strikes Back, because not only was he hired because he had a connection with George Lucas as being his previous film teacher at film school, but also he hired him specifically because he still felt somewhat intimidated by him and felt like he was somebody that could tell George no. Like, that was specifically a reason why he hired him. And it's like, that's the best idea that George Lucas has ever had in his entire career.
Yeah, and I think it's the George Lucas that hires Lee Brackett, who was like the old school screenwriter at the end of her career. And it's the George Lucas who's like the rebel against the studio system and, forfeiting his rights in the Directors Guild, because of the credits debacle and putting everything on the line for that. And I mean, that's George Lucas at his very best. And also, just putting people in charge that he knows and trusts that can make a good film. Yeah, and I don't know what happened to that George Lucas.
It's strange to see where that George Lucas disappeared, but you can see the beginnings of it in Jedi.
I think that George Lucas died during the divorce.
She got him in the divorce.
Well, yeah, but if you look at all the films that were made after that divorce, you've got Jedi and then you've got Temple of Doom, which is heavily influenced by the divorce as well. So
of course it is, yeah.
There's something that's been lost there in that moment, I think. Having the divorce and bringing up his family, something went there.
Yeah.
But yeah, you still had that singular voice. And again, when we start talking about this film that we haven't even fucking started talking about yet, but you can see there is no plan Absolutely no fucking plan. And the only plan that they had would be something that you would think of in an afternoon.
Yeah.
When these executives are saying, oh, we've got a plan, all it is saying, okay, right, Kylo Ren, his journey is the opposite of Darth Vader. Well, that's all they had. We see him being one with the dark side of the Force, and then he's going to go good. But to be honest, when you think about it, no, it's not. It's exactly the fucking same as Darth Vader.
It is the same, yeah.
So that's all they had is just, we're going to do Darth Vader again, but with a different character. Everything else is up for grabs. Everything else.
No, you're absolutely right. Having looked at the time in which we have been recording for
I would say, ironically, even though we haven't actually talked about the film at all, I think everything you need to know is in that preamble.
Yeah.
This is a film that has been carved by preamble.
Absolutely.
Every single move that they make is all influenced by preamble. I would actually even be hesitant to even call this a movie.
Yeah.
When I'm watching it, I don't feel like I'm watching a movie.
And talking about how the previous films as well have influenced some of the decisions that were made on The Last Jedi, I do actually have some pieces of information from the editors of Rise of the Skywalker in terms of both the schedule that they were under and also in terms of where The Last Jedi left them off. So just go over some information. Skywalker editor Marianne Brandon was quite honest when it came to talking about the production of Rise of the Skywalker and what the general feeling was towards The Last Jedi. According to an article on Playlist, she had this to say: "We were definitely still trying to figure out a lot of stuff. It's a struggle. It really affected everything. About a third of the way through, Lucasfilm president Kathy Kennedy was like, JJ has got to spend more time in the cutting room, and I knew that wasn't going to happen. Not with the schedule that we were on, not with what he was dealing with on a daily basis. He was just exhausted at the end of the day." And I think that also plays into some of the rumours that have come out in regards to the making of this film as well. J.J. Abrams, I think at one point even floated the idea of having this split into two films, like Deathly Hallows Part 1 and 2, and it being that type of film. That was pushed back, and then he proposed the idea of having a longer cut of the film so it could have, all of the necessary material within there to tell a coherent story, and that was pushed back as well. And what we ended up with was Rise of Skywalker. Now, that's just in going by the rumours and really reading between the lines of what the editor is saying. But in regards specifically to The Last Jedi, they said, "It's very strange to have a second film so consciously undo the storytelling of the first film. I'm sorry, that's what it felt like. I don't even feel that's true about the third film. It took where the second film ended and just tried to tell a story, I guess any story." They're responding to criticism that Rise of the Skywalker also is a further undoing of The Last Jedi, which I think it is in some essence in terms of what the general theme is. But they do actually recognise as well that at least Rian Johnson's film had vision. He said, "The Last Jedi, I will say this, was just a different take on a Star Wars saga. To Ryan's credit, he stuck to what he wanted to do and he wanted to deconstruct the film and open up to a different direction. And that is the film that he made. It's controversial, but isn't that kind of a good thing?" So even though they're kind of like kicking themselves over where on earth do we take it from where Rian Johnson's left us, with ourselves trying to bridge the gap between Force Awakens and The Last Jedi now, I guess the issue is essentially that Rian Johnson's made a sequel to a film that isn't really, like I say, it feels more like a franchise beginning rather than a middle film. It feels like this is the beginning of a story to tell.
Yeah.
Whereas really it needed to be solidifying and continuing the themes of the first film as to where this series was going. But again, that's the lack of direction once more. And essentially we've got these two films that are in their own way two separate beginnings entirely. And then Rise of Skywalker has got to make sense of that somehow.
Yeah.
So I guess that lets us in as well to the editing process of these films. I wanted to just lay that out before we begin to discuss as well our opinions. So I will say, when I went to see Rise of the Skywalker, I went on the midnight showing with yourself on the first day of release, as I have with all of these films. At the time, I thought, oh, it's fine, that kind of thing. But this is the second time I've watched it through, and I will say that I had a very hard time trying to watch Rise of Skywalker, to a point in which it left me at a place where I feel very apathetic towards Star Wars in general now. And I have been feeling this for some time, but I have no desire to revisit any Star Wars film anymore, including the ones that I like. I feel burnt out. And I know that The Mandalorian is supposed to be very good, and I've watched the first episode and I thought it looked promising, but at the same time I just felt, I don't know if I've got it in me for any more of this. It's just more Star Wars. So I think Rise of the Skywalker to be honest, I really don't like it.
Yeah.
And that's solidified on this watch through for this episode. And I was hoping I would be in a position to defend it more and say, actually, at least it did this right, or at least it's trying to tell these stories, or, you know, much in the same way that I have as, let's to pull one out of the air, like I did on the Hannibal episode or Prometheus episode, where I seem to be, in the face of a very flawed film, seems to have a more positive stance. And I was hoping that that's what I would be with this film, but I just couldn't. I didn't have it in me. I didn't have the energy for it. And I actually began to get a bit angry about how apathetic it made me feel about a franchise that I once loved.
Yeah, I'm pretty much in the same position. I know Last Jedi broke a lot of people. This is the one that broke me.
Yeah.
Because at least, even if you don't like it, you can appreciate that The Last Jedi tried something and committed to it, even if you don't like it. And, you know, there are other flaws in that film anyway that I wouldn't defend. There are, you know, the Canto Bite stuff isn't great. And also there's a couple of things that get wasted, like the fact that they completely wasted the, can't even remember a fucking name now. The fucking silver stormtrooper.
Oh,
Captain Phasma, yeah. How fucking memorable that character was.
even in The Force Awakens, considering the amount of publicity Gwendolyn Christie, an actress I really like, had in regards to the making of those films, she was inescapable during the marketing for those films. She was everywhere. And then I think it amounted to about 3 minutes of screen time for each film, if that.
I thought in The Last Jedi they were going to bring her back as some sort of like bounty hunter kind of figure.
Yeah.
That had like left the First Order and was just doing stuff freelance. And like, I thought that would have been a way better way of approaching it.
Or like a First Order mercenary sent out to kill traitors like Finn.
It just seemed like all they had with that character, which seems to be emblematic of the whole fucking sequel trilogy. It's like, oh yeah, cool concept art for a silver stormtrooper. Let's make a character out of that. Let's have her be a woman.
That's where it ends.
Like
that's where the thought process ends.
That's it. Given all those faults, at least Last Jedi tried something and had some sort of vision behind it. This film has fuck all.
Yeah.
There is nothing underneath the surface. There is absolutely nothing. I mean, right, the positive thing I want to talk about, and this is in relation to the prequels. So the positive thing I can get out of the sequel trilogy over the prequels is that I genuinely think on a basic filmmaking level, in terms of the
technical aspects,
like the technical aspects, like the shot compositions, the cinematography,
you got
CGI.
Cinematography that tells stories in terms of from shot to shot.
I mean, the dialogue, the general acting is easily, I don't think anyone can really argue this. And if you argue this, then you're an idiot. Really, like, they are infinitely superior to anything going on in the prequels, because if you watch those prequels, they are incredibly poorly shot. They are not shot well. They have soap opera staging.
Yes,
George Lucas did not direct those films, if you know what I mean, in the traditional sense. You know, there's that old adage, you know, of him sitting in his chair with his Starbucks, looking at the monitors and doing fuck all.
Yeah,
everyone looking scared stiff around him. I would not defend the prequels in any way regarding that. I mean, I would defend them in the fact that they tried something too, executed it very poorly, but they tried something and they had some kind of purpose. But on a technical level, these films look the part.
Yeah.
You know, they look like Star Wars films.
I think that's why The Force Awakens dazzled me for so long, is because it looked like a Star Wars film and it had a feeling of a Star Wars film. But I think in retrospect, it's proven to be quite hollow, because a lot of the things that I saw as promise in that film have not come to pass.
But I appreciate all the love and care that everyone involved in the production, you know, from a costume, set dressing, animatronics point of view, design.
Stunt work as well is amazing.
Yeah. So really, ultimately, the failings of these films, they really come down to the people at the top, really, the people that are directing, writing, and just giving the films an overall sort of direction, and the people that are making the big decisions, really.
Yeah.
All the blame is on their shoulders, really. Rise of Skywalker looks like a Star Wars film, but I got nothing. You know, it's a weird viewing experience.
It is, and it tonally, although everything looks the part, and it does look gorgeous as well. I watched it in 4K. I've got it on 4K Blu-ray, and it looked beautiful. From a technical standpoint, I cannot fault it. And at least has the illusion of excitement during like the action and that type of thing in the way that it's composed. Like J.J. Abrams knows how to shoot his action sci-fi movies. Even Star Trek Into Darkness. There's a little bit too much lens flare, but it looks the part and it looks exciting. This has that feeling as well, but there was something tonally that felt off about it, that felt almost like one of the early Harry Potter films in which nothing had any impact and it all felt a bit whimsical and weightless. And I'm not saying that Star Wars is the most grounded series, but it actually felt like for example, A New Hope. I think one of the things I appreciated most about it was, despite the fact that it's a sci-fi fantasy film, I could imagine a place like Mos Eisley existing. It felt a bit dirty and a bit gritty. There was dirt under the fingernails of the aliens that lived there. But I think the biggest thing straight from the off is that it's straight from the very first line of information within the crawl, which is "the dead speak." It feels like a reference to Spectre.
Yeah.
I think that's the point in which watching it on this go around again, I was like, oh yeah, this is off. And also just in terms of the storytelling, like, because the story I found impenetrable. It seems to be about one MacGuffin and the other, and to be honest, I don't know what any of these things were, or any of the people that had the MacGuffins were, or what they were supposed to do.
The first thing I wrote in my notes was, when in doubt, MacGuffin. Because it seems painfully obvious that JJ and Chris Terrio had about a month to write this script.
Yeah.
And they, in order to get anything on the table to work with, they had to lean back on familiar filmmaking tropes. And obviously one of the biggies is the MacGuffin. And there's several MacGuffins in this film. You've got the Sith Wayfinder, you've got that dagger, you've got like Ochi's ship, you've got fucking loads.
Who the fuck is Ochi, by the way? It's like,
I don't know.
I don't know where that came from.
Pervert.
Like, yeah. He liked a big snake.
Yeah.
Some pervert. But even like the introduction of Palpatine as well. This is a film of things happening with no explanation. And even Palpatine's introduction, his introduction should have been this. For one, I disagree with the very notion of including him in the film, and it feels like a very cowardly move from the off to appease, like I say in my intro, a Reddit checklist. Essentially, it's like a Reddit fanboy checklist really to meet, and Palpatine is right at the top of that checklist. So straight away I'm like, this is a kind of bankrupt idea to include him, and also to retrospectively make him the author of all of Kylo Ren's pain. It feels very Spectre. But also then to have his introduction to this world and to all of the characters in this world be something that happened before the film even starts, off screen. In fact, it was included in the game Fortnite rather than in the film itself. That should have been a moment of pure impact. That should have been a moment where you suddenly felt the weight of what was happening and what had been happening through the series. But it was so botched that it essentially, like I say, they give it away in the opening crawl.
Yeah.
And that is probably the least creative way in which you can reintroduce this character to us as an audience.
I think also as well, it raises further questions as to what this Skywalker saga is actually about. Because prior to the sequel trilogy, whether or not it's a great idea, George Lucas ended up making the series, 1 to 6, about the rise, fall, and redemption of Anakin Skywalker, and his final act being defeating the Sith and creating balance in the Force. Whether or not you think that is the best idea in the world, it is an idea and does give some sort of shape to the thing. And this just completely shits all over that. It's sort of like, I've not watched Jedi since, but I can imagine watching it now and going, well, that was fucking pointless. Sort of thing, It's kind of one of these things where they're kind of like, oh, yeah, we'll bring that, and then they don't think about it after that. They just sort of go headlong into it, and then no one goes, excuse me, I've got a list of things here that, all the things that, why not to do this? Because again, it vanquishes any kind. When you have situations where anybody can come back at any moment, your stakes are gone.
Yeah.
There's no stakes in the story at all because anybody can come back. It alleviates any kind of narrative tension that you can possibly create.
That's what kind of happens in the Marvel movies as well. Like the moment that you start bringing characters back from the dead in any way, shape, or form, the moment that the idea of death itself, anyway, loses all weight within this series.
And I'm just like writing in my notes. 5 minutes into the film, the story is broken because you've got the bollocks with the Wayfinder. You've got all the stuff with the Emperor coming back and the fact that he made Snoke. That doesn't seem to make any sense whatsoever. The whole author of all your pain, and then you've got all the on top of that. Yeah, you've got this Exegol, which has never been mentioned before ever.
No.
Which is suddenly the Sith homeworld.
And it's one of the most blandest places in the series.
Yeah, and then you've got all this bullshit with the Star Destroyers. These, like, thousands of Star Destroyers manned by God knows.
Each one has its own Death Star.
I think someone did a calculation on this and rendered it, unless he'd magicked them up. It is virtually impossible for this to happen in that time frame. He would have had to have started about 100 years prior or something. And I'm just like, we're 5 minutes into the film and nothing makes any sense. Like, the story is broken.
Yeah.
We're back into prequel territory here. And I would wholeheartedly say this is probably the worst Star Wars film since Attack of the Clones.
Oh, I'm so glad you said it, because I've been on that fence for like...
all its faults, I would even put Revenge of the Sith above this, because at least, even though it still suffers from many of the issues that plague the prequels, it still has some sort of purpose. Like, it's there to do something.
But once more, there's a vision, there's a purpose, and there's a direction for that film.
I never thought I'd ever
with
say
any of
that,
this.
but we have a film here that is worse than that. I mean, I'm definitely not a Revenge of the Sith defender.
Yeah.
It's still a pretty terrible film, but it has some sort of, like, narrative purpose. Executes it very poorly, but it has some sort of narrative purpose. This has fuck all. I generally don't know what this film is here for. It's a placeholder. And it's strange that it feels like a placeholder, because this is meant to be the fucking grand finale.
Yeah.
Like,
that's what it is. And to be honest, talking about The Last Jedi as well, as a way to lead us into speaking about Rey as a character. This film, because of how much it undoes in regards to Rey's revelation within The Last Jedi, and the revelation surrounding her, and all of what that meant. At the end of The Last Jedi, I still firmly felt, yes, Rey is definitely our leading figure for this film, but by the end of Rise of Skywalker, I felt like her character, because it had been reverted back to the whole issue of bloodline and things like that, her purpose within the series up until that point, up until the very last shot of Last Jedi, was to make the point that anybody could be a Jedi, despite, your upbringing or anything like that. Even if your parents were just drunken slobs on a planet somewhere that sold you off so that they could get booze and die. Yeah, okay, brilliant. Yeah, that's exactly the story that this series should be taking, and a character like that should be at its center. But by the end of The Last Jedi, I felt, oh, well, it's just the same story that we've seen 1,000 times before in this series, of somebody of noble birth without knowing it, rising to the true power thanks to their special magical bloodline.
I think somebody said Magic Grandpa.
Yeah.
Somewhere, I can't remember which review, but it was like Magic Blood from Magic Grandpa.
And it made me think, well, what would be the best story to tell then? And one of the things that I think that this series has botched, one of the character who's been really done a dirty throughout this series, probably even from The Force Awakens, is Finn. Yeah. And I really like John Boyega as an actor. I think he really nails it. And I've also always thought that with Finn, not only do we have something that we haven't seen in the Star Wars series before, which is a black central figure as well, but also we have somebody that comes from a background of being on the other side, the bad guy, a stormtrooper, that's broken free of the shackles of the First Order. And it kind of redefines what we think about stormtroopers and everything that we know about them just being binary good or bad. And the fact that it kind of reshapes them as being victims of the First Order also. That's what the revelation of Finn in that very first film, in the very beginning of that first film, that's what it does to me. It makes me think, wow, stormtroopers are people as well, but not just people, they're victims, brainwashed child soldiers. Now, I instantly thought, well, that's our central role. That's got to be our central role, surely. Not just the idea of a stormtrooper being force sensitive, but also the idea of him nurturing an uprising from within the First Order itself, like helping others from within that system break free of the shackles of what is essentially a slave labor force, and overcoming the First Order, this primarily white evil power system, to me, that is a fascinating and interesting way to take that character. And that seemed to be the promise of that character in that very first film, that very first beginning. And obviously you do that within the framing of a Star Wars film, make it fun, make it exciting. But I also think that they abandon that idea even before The Last Jedi begins. They lose anything to do with Finn really towards the end of the first film. I think his was probably a casualty of the rewrites that were done while Harrison Ford unfortunately broke his leg.
Yeah.
And they retooled the film into something else. But yeah, I think they've really missed a trick and done Finn a dirty by just relegating him to somebody that just simply shouts Rey.
That's about 50% of his dialogue in this film.
It is.
Rey!
I also think even what they do with him in Rise of Skywalker is almost an acknowledgement that, yeah, they have fumbled the ball, but they do it in such a cowardly way. The whole idea of making him force sensitive, but not really force sensitive. It reminds me, because they marketed that first film as him being the Jedi. For their kind of like bait and switch, he was the guy that wielded the lightsaber in all of the marketing material. And it was like, oh, you know, this is Finn's going to be our Jedi. And then they kind of snatched that away from him. I think there's a community out there that felt really done a dirty by that. And then with what happened later when they marketed that film in China and really like on the posters made him such a tiny figure on that poster. Yeah. I think this film is a way of them going, oh yeah, we really kind of fucked up there. Let's make him kind of a Jedi, but not properly a Jedi. And his whole skill, his Jedi powers are essentially helping the script writers write themselves out of a corner. Yeah. He just kind of instinctually knows something that the script writers need him to know at any one moment, and that's it. Yeah. I really feel like, yeah, John Boyega and Finn have reason to be upset by these films.
Yeah. I mean, and no one's really talked about, I mean, some of the actors have talked a tiny bit, but no one's really talked about their experiences in this film properly, and I think it's going to be another few years until people really start talking about it properly. But yeah, I can't imagine that he's particularly happy.
I think he was sold on being the love interest for Rey as well in the first film, because that's how it seems to be played, and that's what he thought that seemed to be the direction that seemed to be going in. And then that was also snatched away from him from, you know, people unknown, the powers that be.
Yeah, it just gets to the point in this film where he's just there.
Okay, so one thing that I would like to add, this is something that we're recording after the fact. Since we recorded this episode, more information about the making of Star Wars, and specifically Daisy Ridley's character and John Boyega's character, has come to light. And we've decided to record just a little tidbit after the fact to reference this because we think it's really important to the conversation. So one of the things that I did read was John Boyega released an interview, I believe it was with GQ, the British GQ magazine, which detailed pretty much his turbulent relationship, not just with Star Wars in general, but Disney as well, and the way that he was marketed as a black man in the Star Wars universe. And did you read it, Andy?
Yeah, I did. I mean, I read it a couple of days ago, and I kind of forgotten half the things that I've got up here now. But it was very frank.
Yeah, it was quite illuminating, I would say.
Yeah. I mean, there's been a certain amount of backlash to it, I would say, but I'd say an equal to a great amount of support as well regarding his comments. I mean, I imagine he's like, I'm not going to work for Disney anymore anyway, so fuck it. So,
as mentioned, of all of the actors involved in the series, I think he's the one that's been more vocally, at least on social media, distancing himself from the Star Wars experience, and that's not something that he wants to pursue. And whenever asked about actually returning to these characters, not just him, I guess all three of them, including Oscar Isaacs and Daisy Ridley, have really laughed off the idea of ever returning.
Yeah.
And I think John Boyega's really made a statement by closing these doors in a way.
Yeah.
It seems very final. He's made comments about his treatment on the film, not in a it doesn't really go into how negatively he was treated as a person. He does say that they wanted to market him for his blackness, but they didn't really know how to approach his blackness. Like, they didn't have, for example, a makeup artist that was trained in dealing with Afro-Caribbean hair or that type of thing. They didn't have that understanding of the black experience behind the scenes, but also then he goes into like how they've dealt with his character as well, and how characters like Adam Driver and Daisy Ridley, they knew how to give their characters nuance, but not Finn.
Yeah.
I mean, I really like what Adam Driver does in this film, but his character is essentially the second go-around at Anakin Skywalker.
Yeah, it was an opportunity to channel this particular trilogy round a unique character. And they bailed on it, not even at the late stages. They bailed on it before the end of the first movie.
Yeah.
It didn't feel as much of an issue at the time when watching it, but as soon as you have that moment where Finn in The Force Awakens wields his lightsaber and then is sort of mowed down by Kylo Ren, and then it's up to Rey to save the day, that character's done. Mm-hmm. There's nowhere else to go because they've effectively cut his arc at that point.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen a few comments online where people have gone, "Oh, you've just been ungrateful. They give you that opportunity and now you're shitting on it," and stuff like that. And I was like, that's not really the point of what he was saying at all.
It's like being told to just be happy with what you're given.
Yeah.
I remember when it all came out on, and I don't know, this is all a separate thing entirely as well, and it's not as racially charged as the situation surrounding John Boyega is. But remember when Shia LaBeouf came out against his work on Transformers and that?
Yeah.
He felt like his career was just heading to a dead end, and I do remember that he said that Steven Spielberg and Michael Bay had spoken to him to say that he comes across as very ungrateful for these films, and that was kind of why they stopped him from returning past the third film, but I think he was happy for it.
Yeah.
Once that contract was up for his Transformers films, he was out of there.
Yeah.
I would say as well, Shia LaBeouf he's doing some interesting, weird little films right now. For an interesting, weird guy that he is.
Yeah. I think the other interesting thing as well to come out of that particular interview is his defense of J.J. Abrams. Despite all these other things happening, he still defended J.J. and seemed to lift the lid on what was actually a complete salvage job.
Yeah.
It seemed like a lot of the other rhetoric regarding returning to the franchise was just PR. And this sounded like something he wasn't really intending to do and was just, in all intents and purposes, a salvage job.
Yeah.
I mean, I've got that quote here, like, everyone needs to leave my boy alone. He wasn't even supposed to come back and try to save your shit.
Well, I think that's it. I think, like we mentioned, that he already had a terrible experience with The Force Awakens. I mean, there's plenty that you can read about that, and he's touched upon it in interviews as well about the experience in making. And like filmmakers, they say it in such a way about like, oh, the pressures and demands of the job and stuff like that, which is their way of framing. Well, we didn't have enough time. You know, the production company didn't give us enough time. That's filmmaker speak. When they talk about demands and pressures, that's what they're saying.
Yeah.
I guess in many ways, I still do think it has a lot of J.J. Abrams related issues, but I don't think that J.J. Abrams' involvement is the thing that toppled this tower. It was already way on its way down. And in fact, I do still like The Force Awakens. I still think J.J. Abrams probably could make a really good, if not great, Star Wars film in the right circumstances. This was not the right circumstances, and it's good to see it's good to see John Boyega. I keep on going to call him J.J. Boyega.
J.J. Boyega.
It's good to see John Boyega come to his defense like that as well. Because even though I have been critical, and in this episode I am certainly critical about J.J. Abrams and his writing and directing in this film particularly. But yeah, I think there's more happening behind the scenes that he is far more unhappy with.
Definitely. And we won't hear about that for an awful long time from J.J. anyway.
I guess it also gives us a chance to go into information about Daisy Ridley, what she brought to write recently as well in terms of the making of the film. Because one of the things that she's mentioned is, in an interview with Josh Gad, she, I think, has let slip, really. This isn't something that she was supposed to say.
No.
But talking about Rey's character arc through these films, this really demonstrates how little there was in place for a plan of action. And she mentioned that in the first film, her mysterious parentage was being linked to Obi-Wan, and that was like her actor's journey was linking it to that character. Then in The Last Jedi, it firmly became just a couple of nobodies. And then in the Rise of Skywalker, that's it. Then in Rise of Skywalker, it was not really set in stone until the last minute. She said that, like, even on set, she was being told, we're doing Palpatine is your granddad, and then it would be, we're not doing that anymore, we're doing something else. Yeah. And it was like back and forth. And I'm wondering if it is something that's actually been elaborated on in post, with probably some reshooting or something like that.
Yeah, those few sentences alone just illustrates how little they had to go on when wrapping up this trilogy.
Yeah. Okay, and with that, I think we'll go back to the show.
They had the similar issue with Han Solo in Jedi, in Return of the Jedi.
Yeah.
Where they came up with the whole idea of him being sort of frozen in carbonite. And then they had the whole rescue mission. But then after that, they had no fucking idea what to do with him. Because obviously the original idea that Harrison Ford wanted was for him to be killed in the sort of towards the end of the second act or something to add stakes to the story. And obviously George said no. But
they absolutely should have done.
And that's a complete missed opportunity because although they did it eventually in Force Awakens, I think the execution of it is... a bit questionable, to say the least.
I think the moment works, but I think it now its stature within the series has diminished since I saw that film.
Yeah.
Like the way in which that whole scene is constructed, I like, but I don't think it works anymore. And I feel like Han Solo is a missing element in these films now.
Yeah, definitely.
Especially because of what they did with Luke Skywalker. And again, I really like what they did with Luke Skywalker, but I still think it maybe needed that old world element to like keep us grounded within this world, you know, like the familiar, because Han Solo, he is unchanged and he's still like familiar to us. He's still the Han Solo we recognize. I think if they were going to do that with Luke, which was so challenging, they perhaps needed somebody in that film to be to steady the ship, to be our kind of, I guess, our rod that was still in that place, and maybe that's the film to kill him in.
I just constantly have to just question the whole point of these films, like even just down to the soft reboot nature with the very idea of the First Order and Resistance, and that you've basically just hit the reset button on the situation. But done it in a very kind of lazy way, I'd say. In a way, I feel like the setup of the trilogy is broken from the start because I feel like the way they hit that reset button was incredibly lazy.
Yeah.
They needed the time to have thought of a situation that was maybe a little bit, it stood on its own a little bit more. But I think the main issue is here, I don't think Disney were particularly interested in that. They were more interested in recreating the basic sort of foundations that the original trilogy rested on and then building on from there. And I think that's what ultimately is the bigger issue surrounding this.
Yeah.
Because of that, I don't feel like there is anything particularly distinctive about the sequel trilogy.
No.
And there's no particular reason as to why it is there other than to be a product for Disney.
Yeah.
And the thing is, for the longest time, I kind of resisted against that. And then when this film came out, it kind of all clicked for me.
Same here. I was still very firmly on board in terms of what the sequel trilogy was at the end of The Last Jedi. And I think this film has made me reevaluate everything that has come before. And when The Last Jedi came out, I was still very much a fan of The Force Awakens as well. And now I was going to watch it for this podcast and I just didn't have the energy. I watched The Last Jedi and I was very much appreciative. I also think it's a very well shot film, that it looks beautiful.
Yeah.
But even with that film, a film that I like, when it finished, I was like, now I've got to watch Rise of the Skywalker. And I was just like, I'm just exhausted by this. This is just... And because it's been kind of like absorbed by this Disney blob, I'm starting to find like, okay, yeah, technically... fantastic, they look so much better, but I'm starting to find them indistinguishable from like you can see really that they're just trying to turn them into spacefaring Marvel movies in a way. Like it's just trying to make Star Wars fit that Marvel mold, and rather than allowing Star Wars to be its own thing as well. I mean, we haven't even talked about, and I think this would be a conversation for another day, but that's not even touching about what they've done with the spin-off films that they've made of Rogue One and Solo.
Yeah.
Because that could be an episode all of its own, really. Solo especially.
Yeah,
I mean, Rogue
definitely.
One, both of them have the same production history.
Oh, yeah.
You could do two for the price of one.
The whole thing's a mess.
Yeah.
Everything to do with Star Wars at the moment with Disney is a mess. Like the production of the films, the merchandise that isn't selling, the slightly disastrous theme park lands.
I had a friend that went there and said it was very good. When I went to Disney, they were still working on it, but it looked quite good. But
Yeah, I mean,
apparently
I think the Rise of the Resistance ride has slightly redeemed it, but it's still not what they originally advertised.
yeah, it isn't.
They originally advertised a walking, talking land where you can be your own character within the land and you interact with aliens and other people living in this settlement.
On paper.
Nope, budget cuts. and this was way before, like, coronavirus and yeah. I remember like people just thought it's just like walking through a Star Wars museum.
Yeah,
it was supposed to sort of rival the sort of Harry Potter lands that
Universal
still doing pretty well in Universal, and they are very immersive. And Disney keeps trying to do this, like with the Avatar land, and now with this, and they keep.
But Avatar land. I went there and I really love the look of the place, but that's all that it has going for it. Like the rides are good as well. Like the animatronic ride, my daughter and wife went on and said it was fantastic, and I got to see some videos of the animatronics and they looked amazing. And I went on the Flight of the Na'vi ride and that was incredibly immersive. But when you're actually going through the land, it just looks good. But that's it. There's no other immersive element of the land itself. There's no people there dressed as Na'vi or anything like that. There's nothing really to bring you into that world. It's just another redressed section of the park in a way that's no different than any other part of the park. Oh God, this could get us down a whole new road of conversation.
Yeah, just the whole... I don't know, because there seems to be a general unease with them wanting to give you the same thing over again, but wanting it to be new, but at the same time almost like dismissing the old things that made it successful to start with, and thinking that their new thing is just as good and can stand in its own 2 feet. I mean, like that Star Wars land is a prime example of that.
Yeah.
I can't remember the bloody name of the guy, but it was an executive at Disney World or Disneyland, and he was saying that the original plans for Star Wars Land were more indebted to the worlds and feeling that the original trilogy gave you. So there was going to be it was more going to be based on Tatooine with more of like a Mos Eisley feel with the cantina and everything. And it was more like, it was kind of the thing that everybody would like, because it would still be interesting for new fans, but also it would still be interesting for old fans. Whereas
it kind of feels like they wanted to do a park that was doing everything that Secret Cinema does.
Yeah, in a way.
Follow what they do. Like it would just be like a walk-in version of that requires no effort.
Yeah. Whereas they drew up all these plans. It got to the point where
I was excited for it as well. Like when I saw the plans, I was like, "That looks great."
But it got to that stage, and it got to Kathleen Kennedy's approval, and she was like, "I think we need to do something that's new, that is more sequel trilogy based, and not something that for these 50-year-old fans want."
What did he think my kids are watching?
So even though the plans for Star Wars Land look cool, they failed to deliver on this sort of immersive thing. But also, you're dealing with a Star Wars land that is actually a land that's not featured in any of the films.
Yeah.
And doesn't really have much callback to what people actually like about, Star Wars.
Yeah.
It's a very odd thing. I mean, I think they just about got away with it, especially when the second ride opened. But I still think that a lot of people feel like that land was a bit of a missed opportunity. And I think that's almost like a nice way to sort of parallel against the films, that it does feel a bit like a missed opportunity at times.
Okay, so that's all we have time for on this first part of our Star Wars special. If you join us next week, we'll be discussing more Star Wars. As we return to, I guess it'll be like the main bulk of Star Wars Episode 9, Rise of Skywalker. We'll be more discussing specifically that film rather than the nature of everything surrounding the Star Wars franchise. I say that is the plan, but whether or not we record it as such is completely different. It's entirely up to the gods. But anyway, thank you very much for listening today. I've been Gareth. And that exasperated sigh has been Andy. Take care, my little Jedis.